is signing that contract as we speak. The richest contract in NBA history is up to $304 million over 5 years.
Some Boston Celtic fans are very upset about this. So before we even get started, you guys need to comment in the comment section down below. Was Jaylen Brown overpaid or not? And before we get to the content, we're going to be giving away $1,000 split between 5 of my followers that follow me on X. Yeah, it's called X now. It's not called Twitter anymore. It's at TheFlightMike on X. Now that we get all of that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Boston Celtics were prepared for this moment from the very beginning, and to be honest, they're taking a very unorthodox route in order to resolve this problem. You see, whenever a brand new collective bargaining agreement comes out, it usually does its best to slay the previous dynasty that dominated the era of basketball that the previous collective bargaining agreement was in. And usually, whatever team is able to solve the puzzle of the CBA has a huge advantage over each and every team in the NBA, and usually is able to establish themselves as a dynasty. The best example I could give right now is the new CBA established a second tax apron. The original tax apron was about $6 million above the luxury tax, which increases along with the salary cap around 10% annually. This becomes a hard cap in certain situations, which means you can't exceed this cap number at a specific point. Usually this occurs whenever a team makes a sign and trade, or if they use the menial biannual exception. They now added an additional apron in this particular instance at about $17.5 million above the luxury tax line, which imposes additional restrictions, such as you can't include cash in trades, you can't use the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign free agents, which is huge for any championship team. It's how the Golden State Warriors were able to get Dante DiVincenzo last offseason. You can't sign a player on the buyout market who was previously earning more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. The best example I could give of this is the 2021 Brooklyn Nets when they were signing LaMarcus Aldridge, or the Los Angeles Lakers back then when they signed Andre Drummond, which kind of bums me out because I kind of enjoyed when teams do that, because none of those teams ended up winning a championship anyways as a result of those players. So I don't get why this was a rule. They can't trade picks that are 7 years in the future, which is how the Celtics originally acquired Derek White, and they can't use a trade exception from a previous year. A ton of rules have been imposed on teams because they wanted to avoid another version of the Golden State Warriors, a team that drafted and developed their own homegrown talent. Once they did that, adding additional role players via free agency, which is a huge reason why the Golden State Warriors had to trade Jordan Poole for Chris Paul this offseason. Once that occurred, a lot of people were wondering what were the Boston Celtics going to do about their situation. You see, the Celtics have undergone one of the most masterful rebuilds I think I've ever seen. I mean, going back to 10 years ago when they moved on from Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Jason Terry, and traded those players to the Brooklyn Nets for a plethora of draft picks, they were very crafty in navigating their rebuild. They drafted Jaylen Brown with the number 3 pick in the 2016 NBA draft, the only player from the top 3 of that NBA draft that remained with their team. And the year after, they were even craftier. After winning the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft, they traded down from number 1 to number 3 and selected Jason Tatum. Once again, the only player that remained on their team out of the top 3. And it seems like almost immediately, from the moment that they selected Jason Tatum and on, this team was consistently in the conversation for being one of the premier teams in the Eastern Conference. In Jason Tatum's rookie year alone, they were able to take the LeBron James-led Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games. This was after Jaylen Brown's rookie season, where they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers in 5 games. During the 2018 to 2019 season, they took a step back, losing to the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference semifinals before finding themselves in the 2020 Eastern Conference Finals once again against the Miami Heat. Now, things took a gigantic step back during the 2020 to 2021 season, and there were questions about whether or not the Boston Celtics were going to break up Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. This was a gigantic regression. For the very first time, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown failed to make it past the first round, getting decimated by the Brooklyn Nets in a very dramatic series, might I add, that featured Kyrie Irving stomping on Lucky, and Glenn Big Baby Davis being happy once Kyrie Irving suffered an injury, saying this was Lucky's revenge.
Kyrie Irving stepped on Lucky, and Lucky got his get back. Don't get mad at me because Lucky got his get back. I didn't say nothing.
But the Celtics did something very unorthodox. And bear in mind, I'm a huge Laker fan, and I was impressed at the direction this team took. They didn't break up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, no. They decided to elevate their head coach, Brad Stevens, to the general manager's office. They fired their general manager, Danny Ainge. Well, at least ceremoniously fired him. He stepped down or resigned and then went to the Utah Jazz almost immediately after. They brought in Ime Udoka as the brand new head coach, and they traded for Al Horford. These weren't decisions that would typically strike fear into the hearts of opposing teams. However, it made all of the difference, because following this, the Boston Celtics would have their most successful season to date. During the 2021 to 2022 season, they would make it all the way to the NBA Finals to face the Golden State Warriors. They were even favored to defeat the Golden State Warriors. Ultimately, that's not what would happen. So going into this past season, there was a lot of optimism. You can make a lot of excuses for year one. It was Ime Udoka's rookie season. Boston Celtics overachieved. They had a huge foundation to build upon. I mean, they were second in defensive rating 2 years ago, for crying out loud. Unfortunately, during the offseason, things wouldn't go as smoothly. Of course, Ime Udoka would get into that scandal for having a consensual relationship with a Celtics employee, and as a result, he would get dismissed. Joe Mazzulla was inserted in almost immediately, and the Boston Celtics didn't necessarily lose a beat during the regular season, but in the offseason, I could say that there were times where I felt like Joe Mazzulla was getting outcoached, and that was definitely in display during the Eastern Conference Finals. I will cut Joe Mazzulla some slack because he's coming in to replace a head coach that was beloved by the entire team. I mean, Jason Tatum even said during the All-Star break that Ime Udoka was the greatest coach he's ever played for.
I mean, it's been a tough situation for everybody involved, and it's somebody that, you know, I've talked to throughout the season, just periodically just reaching out, because without, you know, whatever happened, and that's, you know, doesn't have anything to do with me, but, you know, I can't take away the relationship that me and him had and the impact that he had on me in that one season. You know, I love Coach K, I love Brad, I love Joe, I love all those guys, but, you know, just a different kind of relationship I had with Ime, and, you know, probably like my most favorite coach I've had, and that's not a knock on anybody. I got a great relationship with Joe. You know, I love everything he's doing. I'm extremely happy for him. Brad, you know, kind of helped me navigate the NBA. You know, I was 19, and, you know, he kind of helped watch me grow and put me in the right spots. So I have a different perspective and respect for each coach I've had.
Regardless, the Boston Celtics would take a step back, losing to the Miami Heat, the 8th seeded Miami Heat, in 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. So going into the offseason, there was a huge question about what the Boston Celtics were going to do. Do you trade Jaylen Brown, who is eligible for a Supermax contract extension, or do you do your best to retool the roster and build around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum? Ultimately, Boston Celtics made their decision. We found out the other day that Jaylen Brown was signed to the biggest contract extension in NBA history. 5 years, $304 million. And this was met with some scrutiny. There was no player option in this deal, which means the Boston Celtics were thinking that, hey, the salary cap is going to boom tremendously at this point. And I guess some people were desensitized because Kylian Mbappe just got offered a 1-year, $776 million offer to play soccer in Saudi Arabia. But I know what you guys are probably clicking on this video for. Was this the right move? Well, given everything I told you about the collective bargaining agreement, given the fact that the Boston Celtics had to make some crucial decisions about their team, the fact that this team was consistently plateauing, and the fact that there was no way in hell that they would be able to keep Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on the team on Supermax contract extensions while also contending in the future under this brand new NBA landscape under the new CBA. The very first decision they made was trading Marcus Smart to the Memphis Grizzlies in the Kristaps Porzingis trade. They had no choice. This was not their first choice at all whatsoever. Malcolm Brogdon was their first choice to shed some salary. Unfortunately, he failed his physical. So the Boston Celtics decided to give up Marcus Smart, traded Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala, and in return, they got Kristaps Porzingis, the 25th pick in the 2023 NBA draft, and a 2024 first-round pick that was top 4 protected via the Golden State Warriors. Why would they do this? Well, on one hand, you're able to shed some salary for bringing in Kristaps Porzingis. You get to buy low on a player whose value is kind of diminishing. You get to integrate a player that fits into your offense seamlessly and would be a remarkable fit next to Al Horford or Robert Williams. And most importantly, you get draft picks, which are more valuable than ever in today's NBA. Why? Because you're no longer capable of paying role players the amount that you were in years past. That's why they traded Grant Williams to the Dallas Mavericks for 3 second-round picks. They wouldn't be able to pay him. They knew that they were going to pay Jaylen Brown a 5-year, $304 million Supermax contract extension, just as they knew that they were going to pay Jason Tatum a 5-year, $330 million Supermax contract extension at the end of next year. They had no choice. All they could do is pivot and make sure they accumulated as many draft picks as humanly possible to bring in players on rookie scale contracts to support Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis. The Boston Celtics essentially handcuffed themselves to this core because in 2024 to 2025, they'll have more than $180 million committed to Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, Robert Williams III, and Al Horford. Following season, they'll be committed to $140 million just for Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis. To give you an idea, during the 2024 to 2025 season, the salary cap is projected to be at about $142 million. The year after, it's going to be $172 million, and the year after that, it's about $190 million, which means they're probably going to be a second tax apron team for the next couple of years. There is a way out, and that's if this core doesn't work out, you trade Kristaps Porzingis or you trade Jaylen Brown, then you can just build around the remaining players on the team. You might be thinking,
Mike, what if the salary cap increases tremendously like it did in 2016?
well, the new CBA includes something called cap smoothing. What's cap smoothing? No, it's not the process where you take a baseball cap and try to smooth it. The NBA and its players union put provisions in the new CBA to avoid a repeat of the salary cap spike that occurred in 2016 when the last television deal was negotiated. Sources tell Sharanya that the league and the NBPA agreed to cap smoothing that limits salary cap increases to no more than 10% per season through the 7 years of the CBA. The NBA's next media rights deal will start after the 2024 to 2025 season, which kind of sucks because if you remember, the 2016 offseason was insane. A 32% increase resulted in Kevin Durant joining the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Lakers paying Timofey Mozgov a 4-year, $64 million contract, Ryan Anderson getting paid a significant amount. So what I'm trying to say is you can't really bank on the salary cap booming the way it did in years past. But the good news is a 10% increase year after year after year is pretty much what the Celtics were expecting when they gave Jaylen Brown this money. The downside is you're paying a 32-year-old Jaylen Brown $69 million in 2028 to 2029. So at the end of the day, did the Boston Celtics make the right decision? If we're speaking in strictly casual terms, if we're trying to dumb this down as simply as possible for you without going into advanced stats and analytics, in my opinion, if you just look at the landscape of the Eastern Conference, yes, they did. The Eastern Conference is looking slightly weaker this year than in years past, and in the future, it could be even weaker. The Philadelphia 76ers are a gigantic question mark given what James Harden wants to do with his future, which, at least in the short term, we know is not attend Joel Embiid's wedding. The New York Knicks are definitely on the rise, but I don't necessarily know if they're on the level to contend for the NBA Finals yet. The Milwaukee Bucks are once again a contender, but you don't know what their future is going to look like with the possibility of Giannis Antetokounmpo leaving in the future. The Cleveland Cavaliers could easily make it up there, although they had some things to figure out last year. On paper, they're a great team in the East, so maybe if they put it together, they could challenge the Boston Celtics to be the best team in the East. The only true team that I believe, at least from now, could challenge the Boston Celtics for Eastern Conference supremacy is the Miami Heat. So if the core of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown got you to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, the NBA Finals the year before, then there's no question. You have to keep these two together, and you have to try your best to make it work. And it seems like the Celtics did everything they possibly could to do that. So this is a no-brainer no-brainer. Number is a little alarming. They had no choice. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about their decision. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.